Welcome to The Jewish Lens, a podcast to discuss anything and everything from a Jewish perspective. Now, please help me welcome the man who controls the media, your host, Jonathan Rosen.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of The Jewish Lens. I'm Jonathan Rosen, and today I am thrilled to welcome someone whose work has been featured in such places as Asimov Science Fiction and Analog Science Fiction. In fact, she's the author of many books, including her newest series, Miriam's Magical Creatures Files, and she's also went to the same college that I did in Brooklyn College. Please help me welcome Leah Cypess. Leah, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we have a lot to cover, but I want to start by going back with you. So you grew up in New York?
Yes, Brooklyn, born and bred.
You are from Brooklyn also. Okay, which part of Brooklyn?
Midwood.
Midwood.
My parents moved, I think, within like a 10-block radius, three times when I was growing up. So
I have to ask where in Midwood, because I'm originally from that Midwood area. I grew up there for a number of years, and then we moved around I was in Israel, Mexico, and Sheepshead Bay as my last stop in New York.
So I didn't move that. Well, eventually I moved out entirely and I moved to Boston. But for most of the time that I was in Brooklyn, I was in like the East 20s.
East 20s. I was on Ocean Avenue, so it was like,
Yeah.
Right.
So the Kings Highway and Ocean Avenue branch of the Brooklyn Public Library, that's the first place where I went to like go into the reference section, pull out children's writers and illustrators market. That's where my career started.
Oh, wow. So what was your, growing up, what was your, I guess your family life like, and in particular with regard to Judaism? You grew up, observant, Orthodox?
Yeah, we grew up Orthodox. I went to Prospect Park Yeshiva, also on near Kings Highway.
I asked that. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so you know, so from family, from upbringing, went to Prospect Park. After I graduated from high school, I spent a year in Israel. I went to Michlala. I came back, went to Brooklyn College, as you mentioned. Then went to law school, so still very Jewish.
I'm gonna ask about all that. Definitely, I'm gonna ask about that. But you went to I had a lot of friends that went to Flatbush.
Yeah. So and that was it. And I always wanted to be a writer, like even as a kid. Like I said, I would on my way home from high school, to my home, I would stop by the Kings Highway branch of the library and I would I would be writing stories and looking for markets to send them to. So that's really what I always wanted to do. But I remember when I was 8 years old, I was walking with my grandmother, who's an immigrant, obviously, and she said to me, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I said, "I want to be an author." That's when I was 8. And
That's
she
amazing.
said to me, "That's not a good idea. Authors don't make a lot of money."
Yeah. Oh, she's right. But
Yeah.
depending, but it's the same thing. It's so funny because my mom tried to talk me out of a career in arts too when I was, younger too. It's like, I wanted to do acting, and she's like, that's Jews don't do that. It's so okay. So first let's go back. So you were interested in reading and writing. Just curious, what's some of your favorite books growing up also?
So I really liked fantasy and science fiction. There's an author, Diana Wynne Jones, who I don't know if you've heard of her or not. If you
Yes,
love
yes.
Okay, so she was my absolute favorite author growing up, or I'd say one of my absolute favorite authors. I also really read everything. My father was a very big reader, and he'd just go into Judaica stores. So I also read like Libby Lazenwick, like all the Jewish books, Passport to Russia, all the stuff that they were publishing back then. Essentially anything I could get my hands on, I read. I read Isaac Asimov when I was like, 12. Um, so really just anything I could.
Yeah, I was very much the same way. That my father was also a very big reader, and always that was the big treat to take us to the bookstore, actually.
Right. So every Friday we'd go to the library, and back then you were only allowed to take 10 books out of the library.
You still got 10? You still got 10
Right. So every week I take out 10, and the next Friday I'd have read them all, and I'd
Oh,
return them
wow.
to take out another 10.
Oh my God, amazing. Okay, so that was some of the things. You talked about your writing. So you wrote your first story. I was reading on your site when you were in first grade about
Yes.
an ice cream cone in the process of being eaten, which seems very dark for first grade. But so, was there anything on in your life that you want to talk about at that time? Because
No, I mean the story was actually very cheerful. The ice cream cone was super happy to be eaten. So,
well,
I guess dark, but also weirdly cheerful.
okay, well, so you started writing then. Okay, you were writing pretty early. Is that something that has occurred? You said your mom didn't want you to do that. Were you encouraged by anyone else in your family? Did they say like, hey, this is a great thing that you're doing? Like, they look at your writing and say, hey, this is fantastic.
Right. I mean, so it was actually my grandmother who
Oh, you
told
got it. I'm
me
sorry. Yeah,
that
okay.
I should make money. And my parents, to be clear, also always told me you should try to do something that makes money. That's how I ended up in law school. But like I said, my father is a big reader, reads a lot of science fiction and fantasy, brought me books, always encouraged me. To this day is probably my biggest fan. My mother like tries to read my books. She's proud of me, but she's like, I'm happy that you're doing something that makes you happy.
When you first
But my
started
father
realizing,
is really into it.
when did you first start realizing that you had a talent for, like, did someone look at it and say, "Hey, this is pretty good"?
So I honestly don't remember. Like I said, my earliest memory is telling my grandmother this when I was 8, which means I made up my mind before I was 8. And I
Okay.
actually think I was very lucky because now that I have, kids who are older and who are trying to figure out what to do with their lives, it's hard. And I never had to do that. I just kind of always knew that I wanted to be an author. There was never a question in my mind. I can't explain it, but that's how it was.
So, and you sold another thing that's incredible too. You sold your first story. It said here, right? Temple of Stone in high school. Absolutely incredible. So, what was that story about, and where did you sell it?
So it was a magazine called Marion's and Bradley's Fantasy Magazine, which was a big fantasy magazine that was around back then. It no longer exists. And the story was, I'm going to really be impressing upon you my reputation as a dark author. I have to point out here that Miriam's Magical Creature Files, which is written for 5 to 7 year olds, is not dark at all.
Okay, we're gonna
With that
let's
said,
get that.
my first story was about a underground city where unwanted girls were sacrificed to dragons.
Okay, that was the one that you sold.
Yep.
There was a lot of darkness going on there. So you sold. So what was that feeling like that you sell your first story? What were your thoughts? Did you think that this is it? My career is set now.
I mean, I was very excited. I didn't think my career was set. I did think that mistakenly at a later point, but
Okay.
I had been trying to sell stories, I guess, since I was 15. I started sending them out. And I had a drawer. I emptied out a drawer, and I had read all the stuff in Writer's Market about how you have to be prepared for rejection. So I emptied out a drawer, and I was like, "This is going to be my rejection letter drawer." What happened was eventually I had to actually empty out that drawer because it was full, and I was still getting the rejection letters, and I still hadn't sold anything. So, I emptied out the drawer and I was like, all right, I'm only going to keep the rejection letters that actually say something, not just the form rejection letters. So, I'd gathered at least 100 rejections by the time I got that story published. And in fact, one of my rejections, the meanest rejection I ever got, was a rejection letter that said, "Thank you for sending us your story. Unfortunately, you could not get us interested enough in the main character to make us care whether she lived and did well, or whether a convenient earthquake came along and swallowed her on the last page."
Oh my God.
And
Wow.
you know who sent me that rejection letter? Marion Zimmer Bradley's Fantasy Magazine, the same place that eventually published my first story.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's great. There, and those were the days that you actually, like, you had to send them out, like, mail. I mean, right? So you have to wait and wait and wait for them.
Yeah, self-addressed stamped envelopes, the whole deal.
Yeah, that's such a pain. I remember those days well. Not well, not fondly, but I do remember them well. So, okay, so we talked at the beginning. You went to Brooklyn College. I'm just curious now, what were your experiences at Brooklyn College then?
I mean, so for me, again, my parents lived about a 12-minute walk from Brooklyn College,
Right.
so it definitely wasn't your typical college experience. I worked part-time. I went to college to take classes. I lived at home. I didn't really have a campus life or a campus experience that many people have in universities these days. I think a lot of people who went to Brooklyn College didn't have that. I did find that that one great thing about going to Brooklyn College is that I met all sorts of different people who were very real. Like later when I was in law school, I met people who had certain ideas about. Well, we don't need to get into that. Whatever, they had certain ideas. I might as well say it. I went to Columbia Law School.
Yeah, I was
It
going
was
to ask about that
different.
too. I was going to ask about Columbia
It
too.
was different back then, but the seeds of what it is now were
You already
definitely
saw.
there.
Hmm.
And Brooklyn College was just a very different place because the people there, a lot of the people there were working part-time. A lot of the people there were trying to take as many credits as possible so
Right.
they could graduate as fast as possible because it would be cheaper. A lot of the people there were also very religious, like not just the Jewish students, but I would say most of the black students who went to Brooklyn
Right.
College were religious. So you kind of saw a whole different cross section of society than you do when you go to, in sort of elite Ivy League university. where I think there was even then much more conformity of thought than there was in a community college like Brooklyn College.
Well, one of the funny things to me is like, I went to Brooklyn also, and very, a great place for Jewish activities then.
Right.
And looking at it now, it's like almost unrecognizable to me, what it's become. But, we did so many openly Jewish things then.
Right. I mean, I don't really know what it's like because now I don't live in Brooklyn anymore. I live in Silver Spring, Maryland.
Right.
So
So you now, so were you interested in writing as a career then too? Because your mother talked you into going into law school?
well, essentially, I always knew I wanted to be a writer, so I was writing, and then all my education. In fact, the other thing I told my parents when I was 8 years old was that I planned to drop out of high school at the age of 16 because I was going to be a writer, and you don't really need an education for that. So, as you can see, they definitely talked me out of that. So I was really looking for a career to bring in a regular paycheck, while also, simultaneously being a writer on the side. So in college, my idea was that I would be a science writer. So I majored in biology, I minored in journalism, um, and while I was doing that, I had a part-time job in a law-related field. And upon graduating from Brooklyn College, I actually got an offer, in journalism, and I immediately
Oh,
realized that I
wow.
would essentially be making much less money doing something I was much less interested in than if I just continued with my part-time law job.
Hmm.
Then again, if I'm doing a job where I'm getting paid much less money than I would if I was doing the same job with a law degree. So that's why I went to law school.
So what kind of law did you practice for a while?
So I was doing real estate law.
Okay.
I don't want to bore everyone. There's a job called the title closer, which only exists in New York City and I think in California. And it's essentially someone who manages various aspects of like mortgages and house sales. And that's what I was doing part-time while I was in college.
So you were writing while you were still doing practicing law, right? You were still writing. I'm just, what was your routine like? Because I'm just thinking, how
Right.
did you fit everything in?
Right. So what happened was, of course, that once I went to law school, I kind of got funneled into the path of going to work for a very big law firm. I didn't go back to the what I was doing before just with a law degree. I kind of opened up a new path of going to work in a big New York City law firm. And then what I discovered at that point was that, and all this time I was always writing on the side. Whenever like on I commuted to Columbia also, so it was like over an hour on the train each way, and I would write, and whenever I had free time, I would
You're on the
write.
train too? That's what you,
Yes, I love the New York subway. It's my favorite place to write.
oh my God. God bless you.
But then once I was working for a law firm, that came to an end. There was barely time, to eat.
Right,
Like I quickly realized this was not something I could do while also writing on the side.
right.
Um,
Yeah,
so
I'm sure. So. Yeah. When did you fit in? Just anytime you could, you just grabbed the thing and started writing then?
Right. So while I was working at the law firm, my writing time was in the morning, on the subway ride in the morning.
Uh-huh.
I would write, but then by once I started working, there was just like an endless amount of work, and you can get called in at any time. And there was no time. So essentially, I would write in the morning on the train, and then everything I wrote, it never even made it onto a computer. I never had time to type it up. I just had a huge box of like, this is the stuff I wrote on the train this morning. Um, so yeah, so I figured that I would stay in the law firm long enough to make enough money to pay my loans for law school, and then I would find some other plan.
I have no idea how you managed to write on the subway. I mean, I took the subway. When I lived in New York, I took the subway to work for years, and it was always like keep one eye open and what's going on around you.
I
So
mean, I don't know if it was different times or if I was just like, not that smart, but on the way back from work, I would even sometimes fall asleep on the subway.
yeah, yeah, you train yourself when to wake up. I've had that, yes, many times. So, what was the first book that you had published?
So my first book that I had published was actually a book that I had written in the mornings on the subway on my way, to the law firm. And after what ended up happening, I had a whole plan for how I would quit, how I would find part-time job somewhere else. I was going to go to graduate school, but then what ended up happening was that I met my husband, who was doing a fellowship in Boston. And we had a conversation where he said to me, look, I can't leave Boston. I have a fellowship. It's 2 more years. I'm contractually obligated to stay here. But in 2 years, I could look for a job in New York, and you could go back to New York. And I said, oh no, no, that's fine. Let's move to Boston. I'm gonna quit my job. I'm just gonna be a writer.
It's,
So I took that book that I had written, in the mornings on the subway. And I worked on it and sent it out. And eventually I'm shortening it because it actually took 4 years from the time I made
Right.
my grand announcement that I was being a writer until I actually got my first book published. But I got that book published by HarperCollins. It was a young adult fantasy novel called Mistwood. And that was back in 2010.
I'm just always curious with people. What is the thing that you did to celebrate?
Um, I was actually 8 months pregnant when I got the news, so there wasn't much I could do. I jumped around a lot.
So before we go into your new series, which looks really fun to me. Another one that you did is the Sisters Ever After series. So can you tell about, for those who don't know, can you tell about that series because it's such a fun thing.
Sure, thank you. And that series actually is not even finished. It's going to be a total of 6 books,
Okay.
and the sixth book is coming out in April, in this April. So that series is wrapping up. So those are stories about the younger sisters of fairy tale characters. And each book is its own complete story. It's not a series where you go in order. They're connected by the theme. So the first book, which is called Thornwood, is about Sleeping Beauty's little sister. Where Sleeping Beauty wakes up after being kissed by the prince, and everyone is shocked to discover that all this time she had a younger sister, and the younger sister is like, "There's something weird here. I don't like the prince." So, so there's that story, and then the one that's coming, and so each book is like that. The last one, which is coming out in about 2 months, is called Sea Swept, and that's about the Little Mermaid's younger sister, who thought her older sister was nuts for wanting to live in the human world. She's perfectly happy under the sea. But what happens is she gets news that her sister, who was supposed to marry the prince, has vanished. So she has no choice but to make the same deal her sister did, get legs, go on land, try to find out what happened to her sister.
I was looking at your site too. You're very disciplined because it seems you have a book coming out like every few months, like in the near future. I was like, wow, she does a lot of writing here. So I also want to know, looking at your website, you had a lot of fun things on your website too. I want to know, first of all, you have your list of current regarding, your favorite songs and your favorite movies. Are those current now?
No, some of them might be current. I mean, it's certainly not like I hate those movies now, but I made that section of my website a long time ago when I was just starting out.
This is How Awesome is About Time. We had a lot of the same interest in the movie, but I love that movie About Time. So it's, but I always I'm like bawling at the end of it all the time.
Yeah, that's a great movie.
Yeah. So okay. So another things I saw here, like your list of 10 things that you've done that we haven't. So your story. I want to hear about the story about hiking in the jungle that you and a friend in Costa Rica at night, because that sounds absolutely crazy to me. So I want to hear about that experience.
So really, the experience was that we
No
were
guide, just the two of you, just trekking through the jungle or whatever it was.
just the two of us. I said I want to see what a waterfall looks like at night because I have a book I'm writing, and they go to a waterfall at night, so I want to be able to describe it. And my friend was like, "You're nuts," but she was up for it. I mean, it wasn't, to be clear, it wasn't like a hike. It was like there was a wide path. It was a short walk. During the day, it's not something you take a guide for. People do it all the time. But we decided to take flashlights and do it at night.
Oh
So,
my gosh.
you know,
Did you start
if my
hearing like
kids are
animals
listening
all
to
around
this
you, or
interview, that was a dumb idea. We shouldn't have done it.
well, like I said, did you hear animals? Or did you hear like I would have been like terrified there.
No, so I mean, so really it was there weren't animals, there were like frogs and things like that. But, again, it was really like a 10-minute walk from the place that we were staying. It wasn't
Okay.
like we were deep in the jungle.
All right. I was like fearful for you just reading about that.
Yeah.
All right, so tell me about the new series, the
All
Miriam
right.
Magical Creatures Files.
Yeah, so Miriam's Magical Creature Files is a new age group for me. It's for ages 5 to 7.
Okay.
So these are books
It's a
for
chapter book type thing?
Yeah, so this is an
Okay.
early chapter book. It's for kids who are kind of just starting out learning to read, and are advanced or have advanced beyond the very, very simple books, but still need, like short, fun, illustrated books for them to read on their own. And it's about a girl named Miriam, who is an Orthodox Jew, who is losing her first tooth, and her parents keep telling her that the tooth fairy is going to bring her money, and she's convinced that there is no such thing as the tooth fairy, sorry. So she sets out to prove them wrong.
Well, okay, you do write a lot about. I see also that you have a lot of Jewish themed books under other names. I'm curious about. Do you find any? How has it been for you to publish, Jewish themed books, like right now in current publishing?
Right. So this is so I have a pen name, Leah Sokol, under which I write Judaica books, meaning these are books that are published by Judaica publishers like Menucha Publishers or Judaica Press. And
Hmm.
it's a different market. Like those books will assume that the kids who are reading them have a certain base knowledge of Judaism.
Right.
They're not meant for the mainstream. And that's why I have two pen names, so people don't really get
I
confused
saw.
about
I don't know how you get don't get confused. Also, right? Yes.
yeah. But again, people like to know what kind of book they're picking up.
Right.
This book, Miriam's Magical Creature Files, when I started it, I actually thought I'd probably do it as a Judaica book.
Okay.
But then I was looking at a lot of early chapter books to try to figure out how to write an early chapter book, and I saw that, diversity is a big thing in early chapter books. There are early chapter books about, all sorts of, different people, different cultures. So I emailed my agent and I said, hey, I know we never talked about me writing this book, but I wrote it. Do you think you could sell it? And she said, yes, I think it's great and I think I could sell it. And she did. Now, it actually sold way before October 7th. These books take a very long time to come into publication because they also have to be illustrated. So, in other words, the editor acquired it and then we edited it to its final version. And then we picked an illustrator and then it had to be illustrated and then the illustrations had to be revised. So, there's a very long lead time on these books. Um, so my experience has actually been pretty good. In fact, the book just got a starred review from School Library Journal, and the
Okay.
review specifically said that it was a diverse book, which I thought was awesome.
Shocking to me. Yes.
Yeah. So I have actually a pretty strong feelings about this. I think that on the one hand, it's absolutely true. I'm sure there are editors out there who would not touch any of my submissions right now. Luckily, you usually know who those people are because they tend to be very loud about it.
Hmm.
But I think there are also a lot of editors who are not as loud because that's not, because then they're just calling attention to themselves and inviting the mob. But I think there are also a lot of supportive people in publishing, who want to be supportive and who will be supportive if we give them the chance. So I think what's really important is for Jewish writers to not psych ourselves out of,
Hmm.
writing and submitting Jewish
No, I
books.
agree with that.
And yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, without minimizing the fact that just like every book you write can have a good chance of selling or a harder chance of
Mm.
selling for any variety of reasons, I think that, if you write a Jewish book, it might have a harder chance of selling in the sense that there are editors, who won't go for it. But I think there still are editors who will. And as a writer, you know that every book I'm not a writer who's ever written the thing that everyone's looking for that's a sure sell. When I sold my first book, Mistwood, it was a young adult high fantasy. Believe it or not, back in 2010, that was a hard sell. Like half the editors out there would not even look at high fantasy. So, but that's what I wanted to write. So I wrote it, and I had written three high fantasies before that didn't sell, but then finally I wrote one that did. And I think it's a similar thing. I think that if this is what you want to write, and you keep writing and you keep trying, it's not impossible. And there are people out there who want to be supportive.
No, that's good to hear, really, because look, I see a lot of it the other way. A
Right.
lot of people, have talked about it the other way, that it's just that they've. I was a literary agent for a while too, and I remember even getting rejections. Oh, well, we already have a Jewish book in the works, and it's not just
Right.
about this theme. It's just abroad a Jewish book. That was the actual rejection. So
Right.
it's like it's very tough in this environment. It's encouraging that you've been able to do that. And what you said is good, that there probably are people out there who are looking just, not as boisterous about it.
Yeah, I think so.
And
Um,
so I want to know also, okay, what are you working on next?
so the Miriam's Magical Creature Files series is contracted for three books. Obviously, hopefully it'll be a longer series if it
Mhm.
sells well. And
And the first one's this. It's I know we're recording this. The first one's out like March 25th, correct?
yeah, the first one is out in less than a week. The second one is actually already completely finished and is scheduled. It's going to be out in August.
Mhm.
And we're kind of putting the finishing touches on the third one because again, with books for these age, you want to publish them quickly. So I think the publisher's plan is to publish one every 6 months. And I'm hopeful that that the books will sell well enough that they'll want me to write more, in which case I'll be writing more. I have another book coming out in June, which is not a Jewish book. It's a middle grade book for ages, I'd say like 10 to 12, 8 to 12, 8 to 12, called Future Me Saves the World and Ruins My Life. That is a book about a boy whose future self keeps coming back in time because he's invented time travel and he wants his 10-year-old self to do various things to save the future, some of which are pretty hard for a 10-year-old to do. So that's another funny book.
My type of book.
Yeah.
So yeah, because I saw, like I said a few minutes ago, you're very prolific. I saw on your schedule coming out like this month, all within
Yeah.
one
I mean,
hour.
it happens to be this year. A lot of these books were not written in close proximity to each other. Like I said, this book's Miriam's Magical Creature Files, The Truth About the Tooth Fairy, is actually written maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And Future Me Saves the World and Ruins My Life was maybe written last year, and the last of the Sisters of Rafter books was written 2 years ago. So I'm not quite as prolific as I seem, though I do try to keep busy. I like writing. That's my dream. So now that I can do my dream all the time, I do it as much as I can.
No, I think it's important to set time for yourself every day to do it. Yeah, I do that as well. I'm up till like 3 o'clock in the morning, usually writing. So, just curious, what brought you out to Maryland?
My husband's job.
Oh.
He works for the NIH, but let's not talk about that right now.
What's Jewish life there like around where you are?
Silver Spring is great. So like I said, I grew up in Brooklyn, which is obviously, it's Brooklyn. Then we moved to Boston, which is has a significant Jewish community, but a smaller, more transient one. Like a lot of times people come to school, they're there for 4 years, they leave. So it's kind of an ever-changing kind of community. And now I'm in Silver Spring, which to me is the perfect in between. It's not so small that, there's always a question about whether there'll be a second Shacharis or not. There are multiple minyanim, but it's not New York. It's not big. If you want to buy clothes, you're going to Baltimore or New York.
How's it for Jews like going out in the city? Everything looks okay around where you are?
Everything is pretty okay. I mean, Silver Spring is very suburban.
Mhm.
So, so basically the neighborhood where I live, where a lot of from Jews live, is essentially the suburban neighborhood that's completely identical to every other suburban neighborhood, except that it's within walking distance of a bunch of shuls, as a result of
Right.
which the houses are more expensive, as a result of which the only people interested in paying more money for these houses are the people who are interested in being in walking distance from a
Well,
shul.
sure. Right. That
So
seems
it's very homogenous, the specific neighborhood where I live. But in general, we're also near the University of Maryland, which,
Mhm.
has had some problems, but overall has been an extremely good place for Jewish students. With a very strong Hillel, very strong Chabad, a lot of, supportive administrators. So
Actually,
overall, things here have not been terrible.
actually go to Chabad. I'm not that related, but the Chabad has been very welcoming and very welcoming to like everyone there. And I've gone there since I've lived in Florida,
Yeah.
the Chabad show. So, okay, how can people follow you on social media?
Okay. So with the caveat that I'm trying to spend less time on social media, but sometimes succeeding and sometimes not. So I post most of my book related things on Instagram, which is just under my name, Leah Cypess,
Okay.
and also on Facebook, which is also Leah Cypess. But essentially, I post almost the same exact things on both. Um, those are the main places to follow me. I'm still on Twitter and reluctantly am on Blue Sky, but I really use those places as notice boards. So, I just post there when I have a book out and that's it. I
Well,
interact with people much more on the other platforms.
yeah,
And you can also, I keep my website very updated. It's leahcypess.com.
Leo, I want to thank you so much for coming on today. The book sounds like so much fun to me. I can't wait to actually read it myself, but it looks really like my cup of tea. I'll say that.
All right, thank you.
Well,
And thank
again,
you so much for having me on.
well, this has been the Jewish Lens. I'm Jonathan Rosen, and again, a very special thanks to Leah Cypess. And please like, comment, and subscribe.
Thanks for tuning in to The Jewish Lens, where all items used was strictly kosher.